Hello, my name is Zorian Edwards. My pronouns are he, they. I am 18, and I live in Centertown, Pennsylvania. What makes me feel the most like myself is the work I do, mostly writing. I write articles about what's going on in my area. I help prove misinformation wrong, and that is a core part of what makes me feel like myself, and it brings me joy.
Woke up on the right side of the rainbow, feeling bright, gonna put on a good show. There's a skip in my step, I'm doing my best, and I guess that you could say I'm feeling queer today. I'm feeling queer today.
Hey everyone, I'm Frankie Gunn. I'm 24 years old, my pronouns are they, them, and I live in upstate New York.
Once again, I am Zorian.
And we want to welcome you to I'm Feeling Queer Today, the podcast that amplifies the voices of queer youth.
This is Ep06, Transness is Irresistible.
Hey Zorian.
Hi.
You shared at the top of the episode about two of the things that make you really feel like yourself, your creative expression and your passion for truth-telling. I think those two things are really at the core of what this episode is all about. There's a lot of transphobic rhetoric in this world that's promoting false narratives about the lives of young trans people. And today we're going to share some true stories about the joy and creativity of the trans experience and the beauty of being rooted in what makes us feel fully ourselves. One thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is that when we started working on this project, I had not started testosterone. And about 3 or 4 months in, I started HRT. For folks who are unfamiliar, HRT stands for Hormone Replacement Therapy. You don't have to be trans to undergo HRT. Cisgender women sometimes use HRT to increase their levels of estrogen or progesterone for issues such as menopause. And some cisgender men use HRT to increase their testosterone levels due to conditions such as hypogonadism. For some transgender people, hormone therapy can be an important part of the transition process. For example, testosterone, or T, can be used by transgender men or transmasculine folks to suppress feminizing characteristics and promote more traditionally masculine characteristics such as muscle bulk, body hair, and a deep voice. In trans women or trans femme individuals, estrogen can be used to help feminize and suppress more masculinized features. Overall, HRT has been shown to have positive physical and psychological effects on the transitioning individual. Make sure to talk to a trusted healthcare professional if you're considering going on HRT to find out what's safe and right for you. So some of my goals when I was considering starting HRT, my primary one was my voice. My biggest source of dysphoria was what I sounded like. I have been a singer in my life, and my range was a soprano 2, which is the second highest. My speaking voice landed in there as well. And it wasn't something that I disliked as much as it was something that just didn't sound like me. It sounded not even like I was listening to another person, but that it just entirely wasn't correct. And it was like a feeling in my chest. It wasn't a logical feeling in the slightest. It was entirely emotional. And since starting testosterone, I sing more, I talk more, I talk louder, I laugh louder, I feel more comfortable and settled. Other things that have changed for me, and this is something that I have talked to my other trans friends about, and is not something that I've heard across the board, but is true for me. My emotions feel more regulated. In terms of what I look like, my face is filling out in a way that I really, really appreciate. I like looking at myself in the mirror a lot more than I did before. And I feel as though I've been getting stronger faster, which is really nice because I work a very physical job. And all of those things have amounted to me existing in the world in a much more settled and grounded way. I think my experiences have started lining up more with how I feel, and I am meeting more people and going more places that feel good to me. Overall, it has just been a very empowering experience.
I am so glad that it has worked out so well for you.
I was curious what's changed for you in your life since we started this project.
For me, I'm pre-T. I haven't started yet. I was planning to start once I go into college. I've changed a lot as a person, but overall, my core is still the same.
I'm real happy to hear. It's a very sweet sentiment that your core has stayed the same, because I feel exactly the same.
When I go on testosterone, some things that I know that I'm looking forward to is being able to build muscle more quickly, faster. Another thing you mentioned was your voice. Like right now, I know I want my voice to be deeper, but that's not exactly a guarantee if I start to change myself. So in a way, when you start to change yourself, you are creating something that's never been done. Like, you are the only you. So when you start to change, you're just creating something newer. And a part of that is really, really exciting. Like, as an artist myself, I love creating new things. We are now going to share a beautiful conversation between one of our co-producers, Ari, and their good friend, Sam. The two talk about navigating their trans experience, the moments of joy and shame they have felt on their journeys, and the importance of allowing yourself to change.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Ariella, or also Ari. I'm 22 years old, and my pronouns are they, them. I'm originally from Berkeley, California, but I'm currently living in upstate New York. I could not be more honored and excited and curious and humbled to be having this conversation with our friend Sam Baker.
Hi, I'm Sam Baker. I use they, he pronouns, and I'm so excited to talk to you, Ari.
I like to think of this podcast as a bit of a time capsule. We are living at this extremely strange and interesting and painful and beautiful moment in time and in history and in queer history. This conversation is really anything that you want to put into that time capsule.
One of the things that is so important to nurturing my queer self is being patient and allowing myself to change and to evolve fluidly. There's a beautiful narrative around fluidity with queerness, but I think we can put that out for other people, but don't allow that for ourselves. You do have everything you need inside you, and all of your queerness exists and will change, and just giving yourself the space to tap into that, whether that be through learning in community or learning through introspection. That, I think, is what has been so generative for me and my experience and evolution as a queer person. Just knowing when I need the time to change and to grow.
Beautifully said. You kind of talked about this concept of fluidity and some of the tools that are helpful in maintaining that. But do you mind talking a little bit about your personal experience with changes, either in how you identify or just what fluidity has looked like in practice for you, and also the ways that you've resisted change? What has felt spacious and what has felt painful as it relates to your body, your world, your relationships, language, anything like that?
So much of my journey as a queer person was informed by shame. I still struggle today with a lot of shame, not only the more superficial internalized homophobia or internalized queer phobia or internalized transphobia, but shame is so indoctrinated in all aspects of our society. And when I think about that in relation to fluidity, I think about how shame really disabled me to be fluid. And I used to identify in very rigid terms, and that was a comfort for me because it felt like a defensible position within a really transphobic society. I felt like if I had something that was concrete, I could then defend it against attacks that are ongoing. And now I realize that the solution to transphobia and queerphobia is not to cement yourself into the ground, but rather to be mobile. I identified sort of like as a trans masc male who sort of identified as straight, even though I had attraction to all genders. And I felt like that made sense to other people, even if it wasn't how I truly felt. And I wanted to make sense to cis and straight people. And so that was how I adapted to a really transphobic environment that I was living in. And as I did that, I lost myself. And as I allowed myself to return to something that was unintelligible by other people, I became so much more confident and so much more invigorated in my defense of queerness because I was so much more authentically present.
You just expressed so many feelings that I've been having, but have been unable to articulate. So thank you. So often we create these really clear identities thinking that that's going to be the thing that grounds our argument, but actually anything that is so clear is cutting out so much nuance and so much truth. I will be fluid. I will change. I will move. And if I change how I identify, if I change my labels, if I change my pronouns, that is not in any way delegitimizing who I was. If anything, it's all the more so honoring that version of myself because I'm letting it change. And when we don't let ourselves change, we don't trust. We don't trust ourselves. We don't trust that we can hold who we were. I think of queerness as this forever shedding. We're always shedding skins, and we get to keep those skins, but we don't need to keep dead skin on our bodies.
That's wonderful. That brings up so many things for me. I think you have a way with metaphors that's like gorgeous. I'm curious, so you like quickly mentioned shame. I'm really interested in shame just as a personal thing and related to my transness. It's an important narrative to combat, but also to be gentle with ourselves and allow two things to exist. We can allow ourselves to understand that shame is rooted in things that we don't agree with, but also to understand that those feelings are really real. There is the relationship between shame and sex, especially as a masc person or whatever. I had always sort of been seen, even when I identified as a girl, as sort of the masc person in a relationship, and never, ever prioritized my own care, my own comfort, my own desires until 2 years ago. Thinking about this as a time capsule, some of the advice that I would give for younger people is that I think what's beautiful about queer liberation is that there's sexual liberation intertwined with that. And I think that's so important. For myself, I was in community that allowed queer sexuality to exist, but was very complicated and was still at a very straight normative high school. But I became sexually active very early. And I think that honestly, I didn't have the tools or the information to know that I was worth pleasure and I was worth care. And I didn't know my own worth or my own desires. I wish that I could have thought about what I needed and why I wanted to be sexually active at the time. Because I think that in truth, I did a lot of more damage and I've had to unlearn so much more than if I waited until I knew myself a little bit better. A lot of it is valuable insight, that ability to allow yourself to be vulnerable. Not that it always has to be vulnerable. And also stone butches totally exist and that is totally a thing. But I think that there is pressure to be stone because of a lot of misogyny, because of a lot of transphobia, because of a lot of queerphobia. And sometimes it takes a lot of processing to get over that.
As a masc person or as a man, we feel like we have to reenact toxic masculinity. And that is so painful to me because that's not trans liberation. That's trans assimilation into a horrific gender binary system that is built on the oppression of non-men and is so intertwined with white supremacy and with racism. It's really hard to see when transness gets wrapped up with reinforcing the patriarchy. And also, trans people need to be safe. And if you are in a situation where you need to pass or you need to act a certain way, this is the cost and this is the sacrifice and this is the compromise. And we will do what we need to do to survive. When I envision a liberated queer trans world, I understand that sometimes one of the steps that will need to be taken first is whatever steps we need to do to be safe in a world that is so deeply transphobic. How do you resist and learn how to live?
There's a lot of work that you have to do with whatever the way you process really big emotions. And I think that work is part of the process, but can be really, really taxing. But one of the things that I want to think about as resistance is play, trans and queer play. And that can look so many different ways, but has been actually some of the most intense growth that I've experienced is allowing oneself to be silly. You know, gender is silly. It's also deeply, deeply important to me, but it's also just funny and this weird thing that we all play within. I think you can think of resistance as something that is just putting on some fun makeup or whatever and dancing around your room or talking with your friends. And I just encourage that as well as all of the hard, gut-wrenching work that we all have to do.
It reminds me of this quote from the writer, thinker, artist, visionary Tony Cade Bambara, who said, "The role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible." And I think that to be trans is to be an artist, because to be trans is to make something out of the impossible. Maybe for 1 second, 1 minute a day in your mind or in the world, how can you make your transness irresistible? Transness is irresistible. And that's why they're so scared of it, because it can be so much fun. So I love this idea of play as resistance and transness as irresistible play that will bring on revolution. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you so much. It was so great to talk to you.
So the subject of shame is something I relate to from that segment. My trans journey is a little rocky. I did not want to be trans at all. I felt a lot of shame in changing my gender identity, probably because that was significant in the way everyone treated me. I knew that I didn't fit in from a young age, but it was kind of hard not to want to conform because I was a little girl with blue eyes and long blonde hair. And that is something that my mom was always like, "Oh my gosh, you're so pretty. You're such a pretty girl." So I was like, I must be a pretty girl. So growing up, I believed I was a pretty little girl. And with that came some burdens because I honestly was not that attractive. My close friend now, I remember the first 2 sentences he said to me. I sat next to him on the bus. He looked at me. He went, "You look like a boy and your teeth are yellow." And now we're best friends. But after that, it made me start to think. I was like, is this actually the way I want to look? Am I like, why do you say I look like a boy? I don't look like a boy. And then I sat there and I looked in the mirror and then I started to see what he was talking about. So after that, I was like, all right, whatever, quit thinking about it. So then when I actively started liking girls, I came out as bisexual woman. And then that came with some questions. I started to have more trans friends. I started to educate myself on the trans community. And it was always something I admired. I was like, people are so brave for being themselves, for finding who they are, for actively making that change so they will be happier with themselves. And I was like, but I'm not that. I'm not that way. And then I started experimenting. Why don't I try to like dress more masculine, challenge some of the gender norms? And then I came out as gender fluid because it just made sense. I was experimenting, like I was switching. I had more of a feminine cycle, more of a masculine cycle. And then I started to realize I liked dressing more masculine. I liked when people started calling me a boy. I liked the gender confusion that it sparked in others. And I was like, well, I can't be masculine all the time. Like I'm gender fluid. Like I can't just stay in this cycle for so long.
And I was talking to one of my trans friends about it, and he goes, you know what that sounds like? I go, what? Sounds like you're trans. I'm like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. No, I'm totally gender fluid. I'm not going to conform. There's no reason why I should choose. And that is true for many people, but it was not true for me. Eventually, I came out as trans to my friend, and he was like, I knew it. You can say that I knew it this entire time. And he's very proud of it. So then I started socially transitioning. Luckily, I haven't had too much opposition socially transitioning. It's just been more of a struggle with the school system rather than like my best friends who were all very comfortable with me being trans. In a way, I'm still being told that it's a phase. A lot of people in my life think that maybe in a month or so, I'll want to grow my hair back out. I'll want to start dressing more femininely. Maybe that I miss the way I used to be. I know my mom still really wants to see her baby girl back the way I used to be. But I know a lot of people around me really want to see me admit that I was wrong. They want to see me back down from this, because I changed my name, like not legally, but I changed my name. I changed the way I present myself. I changed the way I carry myself. And I think a lot of people really want to just be like, but you're really just a girl. And some people will say that. And if that does happen to change, then there shouldn't be any shame in that. Because at least you can say that, hey, at least I tried. At least I went out and actively found myself rather than just listening to what everyone else has to say and conforming to that. It isn't their responsibility to try and peg you as one thing or another. And you shouldn't have to carry the burden of people's expectations. It's not fair. I know that I am a trans man. This just feels like who I am. It feels like how I am meant to be. I talked about how I used to identify as gender fluid, and then I slowly but surely learned that I was trans through that identity. It was because it felt more like I was playing dress up. And in a way I was. And when I dressed more as a guy, it felt very affirming. Not because it was more simple to do, but more because of the way people interacted with me. When someone would see me from behind and go, hey, sir, hey, man, can you help me with this? That just brought me so much joy. Being like this brings me so much joy. As much as people struggle for being trans, as much as people struggle with finding out who they are, I know this is right for me because of the amount of gender euphoria and joy that I have for myself.
For folks who may have never heard the terms gender dysphoria or gender euphoria, here's a quick primer. Gender dysphoria is used to describe the feeling of discomfort or distress due to the conflict between a person's biological sex and gender identity. This may involve feeling like their gender identity does not align with the gender they were assigned at birth. The symptoms can vary very widely, including depression, anxiety, social isolation, and a desire to alter one's physical appearance to align with the gender identity they correspond to. In contrast to gender dysphoria, gender euphoria describes feeling right in your gender when you look at the way it is presented and received. People experiencing gender euphoria feel happiness or joy and a more rooted sense of self. You do not have to be transgender to experience gender euphoria, but many trans people do experience gender euphoria when they transition to the gender expression that is correct for them.
I think gender euphoria is a really, really special part of being trans. When you start finding those moments of literal ecstasy, like when you see something in yourself that hits in the core of your being, when you recognize yourself for the first time in potentially years or ever, it's those moments that you just feel so unabashedly able to exist in the world. And I think that those are moments that really deserve to be celebrated. And it makes me sad that cis people don't do the kind of work that is required to experience those moments, because gender euphoria is not just for trans people. It's for literally anyone and everyone who is alive. And actually, I'm sure cis people do experience it, but they don't label it as such. It's like, I don't know, a girl getting ready to go to a party and putting on her favorite outfit and her makeup all nice and being like, yeah, like that's me. I'm that bitch. Feeling confident enough to like go out for a night. Or a dude putting on his favorite hoodie, or maybe he doesn't get to dress up for things that often and gets to wear a suit to a wedding and like gets to see a different side of himself that feels like home. Whatever it may be, like those moments exist for everyone. And trans people just take the time to recognize them because they are far more fleeting. And the journey, the transition is finding those moments in daily life and building a gender euphoric world for yourself. I first came out as non-binary when I was 15. I too, at one point, identified as gender fluid. I've identified as genderqueer. I now go by gender nonconforming transmasculine, which has stuck around for quite some time. But as I talked about, I believe in an earlier episode of this podcast, the label of transmasculine was to get me on testosterone. And I now am on testosterone and have been for the better part of a year. I'm still holding on to that label because it still rings true to me, but it's something that at some point maybe won't stick around. Who knows? I think gender nonconforming will always be a part of my identity. I am a firm believer that masculinity and femininity are not opposites. They are siblings. They're friends. They share a seat at the same table. And I've been walking a line between them for most of my life. Androgyny has been an important part of my identity for quite some time. When I first started experimenting with my gender, I leaned pretty hard into the masculinity because I felt like I needed to find a defensible position. In this beautiful segment that Ari produced, Sam says, the solution to trans and queer phobia is not to cement yourself into the ground, but rather to be mobile. And when I heard that, it really resonated with the experience I had of coming out as non-binary and feeling as though it was not a grounded enough position and I wouldn't be able to explain myself. I wouldn't be able to prove myself to other people. And what I've learned since then is that there is no proof necessary. I am it. I exist, and therefore that is enough. There is no defensible position that you need to have because existing as a queer person is a complicated and beautiful thing. And you don't need to necessarily be able to explain it. You don't have to be accessible to everybody all the time. And so once I started figuring that out, I started unlearning the fairly toxic masculinity that I had adopted and took the time to deconstruct why it was that I felt the need to adhere to those standards set by cis society. And masculinity became a safer place for me rather than something that needed to be defended. It became cozy and soft, which was not something that I had expected because I had always viewed masculinity as hard and rigid and stoic. And what I learned is that, in fact, it is softer sometimes than femininity, and it takes a more gentle hand to wield. It has actually been a really fun process to deconstruct, and I am eternally grateful to be on this journey because something that Ari said at one point, it was a conversation that we had together. Ari said that trans masculine people and trans men are the people that are going to be breaking down toxic masculinity because we get to paint on a blank canvas. And I like the painting I'm making.
So in a way, I'm still breaking down that toxic masculinity that most people will just automatically think is masculinity. My father was a very traditional, like stoic, what you would call a toxic masculinity man. That's what I grew up around. He's the one who raised me. So if I wanted to be a man, if I wanted to prove myself to him, it would be like bringing firewood down to the house, providing for the family, a lot of those traditional values that were often regarded to men. And he passed away in October. And even before he passed away, I was still trying to figure out what exactly me being a man looks like, what it means. About a week prior to my father's death, we got into a huge fight, and I was more frustrated because there were so many things that I was doing, a lot of things about me that he just either didn't understand or had no idea about. And I think the reason why I was frustrated in that fight was more because he didn't know and didn't care to ask. And that was my mentality during that entire fight. It wasn't entirely his fault, and it wasn't entirely my fault, and the fight was bound to happen. It was building for quite some time. But after his death, I went to his viewing, and I walked up, and I basically whispered all the things that I wish I would have told him. Most of it being my trans identity, the effect he had on that, and why I never told. And I'm not quite sure if that was easier or harder, because there is some relief in never getting to know his response, and there is some regret in never getting to hear his response. Because at the time of the fight, and even currently, I feel like he wouldn't have accepted me. I feel like he would have probably come around in maybe like 2 years. Like, eventually, it wouldn't have been a never, it would have been a not now. That's how I feel currently. And there is a possibility that he would have kicked me out. I would have had to find somewhere else to stay, which is sadly the case for many, both in my position and just in general in the LGBTQ position. And getting to tell him was also very relieving for me, because I didn't have to worry about those things. I didn't have to deal with the backlash. It wasn't a secret that I tried desperately to hide from him. Like, I have a trans flag up in my room. I made it very clear that I have trans friends and he's not allowed to pick on them. It wasn't a major secret. Like, if it was something he had found out or looked up on his own, I would have been fine with it. Like, that's one thing. But having to actively tell him is another.
Either your parent didn't have the capacity to ask you about yourself when it was so clear that you were literally like your name is an expression of yourself. You were expressing yourself in one of the truest forms, and either he didn't ask you or didn't read or watch the things that were important to you and that you were involved in and put work into. And that's a lot to hold. My dad, I don't talk to him anymore. And not having experienced the same kinds of things, but having clear indicators that he had no interest in the things that I cared about, it hurts a lot. And I'm sorry that that's something you experienced as well, because parents are supposed to support their children. I think that that's an experience that a lot of trans people have, unfortunately, whether it's one or both parents or extended family, but it definitely hits home harder when it's the people that raised you. But it's such a common experience that I feel like there is a lot of camaraderie amongst trans people solely just for having that shared experience.
I came out to my grandma and my mom at the same time. I think it was New Year's, actually. It was about a year after I discovered it and had fully accepted that part of myself. My grandmother is the most accepting person I know, but I know she struggles at times. We all sat down and I was struggling mentally. And I was like, hey, I think I need a therapist because I am struggling a lot. And that was already an emotional conversation. And almost directly after that, I think I was looking at my grandma. I might have just been looking at the space in between the two of them. I told her, I was like, hey, I'm bisexual. I like both boys and girls. Is there something wrong with me? And initially it was, oh, no, there's nothing wrong with you. They both accepted me. And it was a really sweet moment. But a few months after that, my grandmother, I didn't realize she struggled with it. I didn't realize she struggled with it at all because she's such an accepting person and always has been in my life. But we were driving somewhere and she goes, I'm going to tell you something and I don't think it'll hurt you, but it might sting. She told me that she had confided in some of her older friends and that she had talked briefly about it. And she's like, I feel guilty for having some form of prejudice because just thinking of you as a girl at first was very confusing to me because I had never pictured you that way. I never really thought to. But then eventually I came to the consensus that it doesn't really matter who you're with as long as you're happy. And we ended up, we ended that conversation on a very good note. And even when I came out to her as trans, it wasn't as formal as the first one was because I was very, very hesitant. But I did eventually tell her, and she's like, okay. She's still not fully quite sure how to grapple with it. And she slowly but surely was like, oh, you really are trans. She didn't say that out loud, but I could see it kind of click in her brain as she was trying to figure it out.
So Zorian, you and I are both occupying a very specific place on the trans spectrum. I'm transmasculine, you're a trans man, and we can only speak to so much of the trans experience because there's no way for either of us to know what it's like to be trans femme or a trans woman. So I think it's really important to share the experience of people that don't occupy the same space that we do.
Up next, we're going to hear from 16-year-old Kiwi, who shared her story in the Future Perfect Project's original series, Queer Youth Animated. Forced out of her mother's home during the height of the COVID pandemic, Kiwi finally finds a safe and welcoming space for her to become the woman she has always dreamed of.
My name is Kiwi. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. I'm 16 years old and I am from Las Vegas. I was assigned male at birth. From a really young age, I have always known that I don't really fit the standard. When I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, I was watching a superhero movie. I think it was the X-Men or something. I saw this girl named Mystique, I think. Her superpower was that she could transform into different things, and I realized that I wish that I could do something like that too. My mother, she's from Thailand, and my dad, he is German. In the house that I grew up in, my mother definitely expected a lot from me. She would use race and she would use her background to sort of push that. She would say things like, oh, you're Asian, so you should get straight A's. I never really had a place where I felt like I could be myself, where I felt that I could be accepted. I went to school in rural Arkansas. For a couple of months, all of the kids in school called me Sushi. If I were to wear a skirt in public, my heart would probably stop. I would probably just fall over right there. Furthermore, other people will disrespect me for it. Call me a pervert, call me a weirdo, call me a loser. That's just not right. In March last year, my mother, we had been fighting for a while, and she kicked me out during the middle of the pandemic and put me on a plane to go live with my dad. And I'm lucky enough that, my father and my stepmother, they both love me very much, and they're both extremely LGBTQ supportive. I feel like the biggest thing that sort of went into me becoming who I am, into me transitioning into becoming a woman, is like my desire to be a mother. I used to tell myself that I wanted to be a mother so that I could be good to people, spread love to people. I started coming out in April, more to my family in June. I already got to start hormones in October, the day my 16th birthday, which was really, really cool. It was awesome. It was a great birthday present.
I absolutely loved that. It was joyful to listen to a different perspective. And I love how straight to the point it was. It was just, hey, this is what happened. Here's how I felt that this would happen. And then I'm me. And seeing someone get to be themselves is always such a joyful thing for me. I admire this person very much.
The biggest thing that stood out for me is how intrinsically linked Kiwi's desire for motherhood is to her transition, and how I had the exact opposite experience of the idea of motherhood being like dreadful and something that I started running from when I was a teenager and continue to run from as an adult. Motherhood is a very scary thing for me. And hearing someone talk about it as something that she so deeply desires is inspirational. And it is absolutely lovely to hear that the trans experience can exist as something other than my own, and how wildly different we all are, and how cool that is.
Yeah, kind of drawing that back to the whole idea of transness as art, like building something that's never been done before.
Yeah.
It's amazing stuff.
Zorian, I am so happy and incredibly honored that we've been able to have this conversation today. Any discussion surrounding trans people really needs to be led by trans people, and I'm oh so grateful that we've had the platform to do so.
Me too.
Thanks for listening today. I'm Frankie.
And I'm Zorian.
And you've been listening to
I'm Feeling Queer today.
Thanks so much for listening to Season 1 of I'm Feeling Queer Today. If this is your first time listening, you can go back and check out episodes 1 through 5 to hear more amazing content created by LGBTQ+ young people. Stay tuned for the release of Season 2 coming in September, and until then, look forward to a few bonus episodes in between. And if you like what you hear, please rate us and share the show with your friends or family, or both. And don't forget to ask yourself, how am I feeling queer today?
We hope you enjoyed our episode. For more information and resources about it, check out the show notes or visit the episode page at thefutureperfectproject.org/podcast.
If you or a young person you know between the ages of 13 and 24 is currently in crisis, check out thetrevorproject.org for LGBTQIA+ specific support through text and chat, or call 1-866-488-7386. We will also include this information in the show notes as resources.
To learn more about the Future Perfect Project and all of our free arts programming for LGBTQIA+ youth, visit thefutureperfectproject.org or find us on social media at The Future Perfect Project.
I'm Feeling Queer Today is produced by the Future Perfect Project with support from Radio Kingston, WKNY, AM 1490, FM 1079, Kingston, New York. This episode was produced by me, Frankie Gunn.
And me, Zorian Edwards, as well as Ari, featuring Sam and Kiwi.
Our theme song was composed and performed by Alex Massey and produced by Emma Jane Seslowski. Additional music composed by myself, Alex Massey, and Epidemic Sound. Episode mixing and mastering by Julie Novak with assistance from Emma Jane Seslowski. Special thanks to executive producers and mentors, Julie Novak and Celeste Lacine, as well as Future Perfect Project team members Ryan Amador, John Wan, and Aaliyah Jamil.